politics at New York University. It used to be called political science when I went to school, but they've wised up now, right?
In some departments it's politics, in some it's called political science, and in some it's called government. It's all the same thing.
When it's been politics here since?
At NYU, as long as I've been here.
All right. Bertell is the author of many books. I remember a book on Marx and Wilhelm Reich, a book on alienation, a book on the U.S. Constitution. And he's planning a book on how to cheat on, how to pass college exams. But you do have two new books out. Would you like to tell our audience about them?
Well, there's a book here. I don't know if people see it.
Hold it up and I'll zoom in on it.
This is a book on dialectics, what it is, how to use it. And here's a book which has just come out, which is a debate on market socialism.
The people's stock market.
Hey, nice cover.
Like they had the People's Bomb. I mean, back in they got their first atomic weapon.
The people who are arguing on behalf of market socialism, I'm arguing against those who are arguing on behalf of it, are talking about what could be after capitalism in the advanced countries. So it's not about China. It's about trying to use certain market mechanisms of exchange inside a basically socialist society.
Good luck.
No, I think that's exactly what I tell them.
I'd like to discuss. I haven't told you this topic before.
You haven't. This is something of a mystery to me.
But you're a polymath, so you can talk about everything. I want to talk about the future of socialism. And I'd like to start by although it's not, in my opinion, not really a socialist country, or maybe it had 1% of socialism. The Soviet Union collapsed. It stayed at the end, and I have my own theories, but what do you think was the cause of its collapse and its inability to progress from a rather shaky start to something much better?
Let me stick with your first question, which is the future of socialism, and then you jumped immediately into the Soviet Union, as if in some way that helps us understand the future of socialism.
Well, that's what everyone,
but I didn't expect you to be part of that.
You have to consider the fact that the collapse of the Soviet Union has meant that all the ideologues to the left of Clinton think that it means the collapse of the end of socialism.
Tuli, if somebody didn't have any legs, what more would it add to the explanation for why he can't walk, can't run, to say that he has a bad attitude or he adopted the wrong strategy? He doesn't have legs, and that's why he can't run. Just a second. In 1917, after the destruction of World War I, 1921, after the additional destruction caused by the Russian Civil War, there was very little with which to build socialism. Socialism is not simply an idea. It is a practice based upon that idea, but it requires certain material conditions. The number one lesson of Marx's materialism is that you can't build something with nothing. And when the Soviets got started, they had as close to nothing as you can get in terms of the material and social conditions which were necessary in terms of, for example, a great deal of wealth, an industrial base which can produce far more, complex, developed organizational structures, skilled and educated workers who are a majority in the population. None of this was the case.
And it had an unfriendly world to work
and a world which was actually in the process of invading the Soviet Union during their civil war. In China, the case was very similar. So what they went on to do, the leaders in those countries, I think, were socialists. I have no hesitation in admitting that. and they would have liked to build socialism, but the wherewithal to do so just wasn't available. What they went on and did in those countries has very little in common with socialism, and very little really in common with capitalism either. And our problem is not to have the right, the theory and the language with which to describe what they actually did, which was different than both socialism and capitalism.
All right. I agree with you all of that, but I would have to say that socialist activists of the next 60 years after the Russian Revolution did not have your attitude that socialism was, let's put it this way, it's sort of an impossible, unreal question, but what would you have done if you were one of the socialist leaders of the Soviet Union? Would you have abandoned the attempt instead of having it lead to a kind of impossible, repressive, terroristic, murderous society? What would you have done?
Well, I do think they had some choices. I don't think it had to be all the terrible things that you said. One possibility was not socialism. I think they could have done more or less what Castro has done in Cuba, by which I mean you have there a dictatorial society, but an egalitarian one without much corruption, one which respects most civil liberties of the people, one which tries its best within given the range of material conditions that they've inherited, tries its best to do what it can for the well-being of the people.
Right.
I think that is possible, and I
little repression goes a long way, though, if you're the one who's in jail for 15 years.
I'm not sure there's more people in jail in Cuba. I expect there's many less there than in the United States for political reasons.
It's going to disappear now with the introduction of foreign capital.
I don't think it's going to disappear. I think it's going to be modified some, and I'm disappointed that that's happening. But let's go back to your first question, because it's an important one. I just don't want it to be a way of talking about the Soviet Union, because I don't think the Soviet Union is really relevant to the future of socialism, where I think we're talking about us here, what we can do.
Yeah, okay, that's good, but how do you explain then the obsession of the entire left movement in the last 60 years with the Soviet experiment?
First of all, you're exaggerating. I don't think you were ever obsessed, and I consider you a part of the left.
Are you kidding?
You were. I wasn't. I never been
Well, all right, in 1936, when I was 13, I joined my first Communist Front organization. You know why? In high school. Because there wasn't anything else. And I was around the Trotskyites, and they centered also on the Soviet Union and had a severe critique of it, but that was the center of it. And my impression is that even the anarchists say that there were anarchists who joined up with the Bolsheviks and thought many of them became Bolsheviks. And the rest got
right from the start. There was
so tell me about your.
I was never involved in either in any kind of pro-Soviet organization.
So when did you be
And I've never.
It's not a question of being. The Trotskyites were not.
I was never obsessed in the way you say you were.
Yeah, but you're very obsessed.
No, I don't think so, Tuli. I think you're wrong about that. There was a big section of the left that you are describing, and an equally big, maybe bigger section that I don't think you're not, which was critical.
So when did you become a Marxist? In what year?
When I started thinking of myself as a Marxist, probably in the late 50s, around 1960.
All right. So by that time, the crimes of Stalin were obvious.
Sure.
All right. So let's just leave it up to 1960.
Yeah.
Wasn't the left movement from 1920 to 1960 completely involved with the Soviet Union?
Look, you're making mashed potatoes of the left movement. The left movement, one of its strengths and weaknesses is that it comes in so many pieces, and some of the elements were, and some of the elements weren't, and others were involved in other kinds of
during the 60s, things started to
No,
change.
before that, Tuli. Before that, I was involved in socialist movements before I became a Marxist, in the late 50s, and we were not involved.
What groups were they? Could you tell me?
Sure, it was a group called the Student League for Industrial Democracy,
Yeah.
which
They
was a
were
socialist group. Well, no, it wasn't connected to any particular party. It was an educational kind of socialist group. A wishy-washy one,
Okay.
which I'm much more radical, much more socialist now than I was then.
But these were all very minuscule groups
All the socialist groups.
compared to the Communist Party
At that
and
time,
the Trotsky.
at that time, the Communist Party and Trotskyists were also minuscule. I don't think the high period for the Communist Party was the 30s. But again, Tuli, I think you're getting off on a tangent. You want to talk about the future of socialism.
Okay, all right.
This is not a discussion
No,
about
I don't want to
the Soviet
discuss
Union.
this for the rest of
But if you want to discuss why the Soviet Union collapsed, it's an interesting discussion. I don't think, and I think this is very important, I don't think the Soviet experience, its successes, and there were some, like Sputnik or helping to win World War II, I don't think its successes, nor its failures.
Nearly lost because of its bureaucratic organization.
I don't think its successes or its failures have any lessons for us here and now, and that's what's important.
All right, so start though from, if you would, from the relationship of all the old, a large segment of the radical movement, which feels the people who were fixated on the Soviet Union. These people, many of them have now, sort of felt that socialism has no future, right? Mm-hmm. So let's start from that point and tell us what you think will and should happen.
Well, I see socialism as something which comes about in order to deal with the problems which arise within capitalism and which get worse within capitalism, using means which are themselves made available by capitalism. And therefore, socialism has to be understood as something which comes after capitalism. And capitalism, Marx and the Marxist traditions recognize, did extraordinary things. Produced an amount of wealth and an ability to produce wealth which is greater than had ever been produced before. At the same time, and through this same process, it created enormous inequalities. It didn't bring about slavery, but developed slavery in certain places. It got involved in certain forms of colonialism, which we call imperialism, which were extremely brutal. It creates, I can go on and on in terms of the problems of capitalism, which come about within capitalism, and capitalism, relying as it does upon the capitalists and their interest in maximizing profit, giving them the power to decide what is going to happen in the economy, based upon actions which take off from such goals. Capitalism does not have it within it as a system to solve these problems.
Okay.
Consequently, socialism comes along as a way in order to solve those problems at a level of civilization which is possible because of the successes of capitalism.
All right, let me say two things. Anarchists have discovered or used the fact that in medieval peasant society in Europe, there were 100, which has always been considered a kind of horrible state. There were 100 saint states, which meant that no one worked. So my point is, I know I don't have the specific instances, but we're talking about the idea of progress. Now, haven't there been societies, small places and other places that were not as industrially advanced as we are today, that were closer to what some people would call a socialist ideal? Isn't that possible? That's half of the question. The other question is, Marx had the Hegelian idea, I think it's Hegelian, although all of these philosophers borrowed from people before him, of the idea of progress, and that Hegel at least felt, and I think, does do Marxists feel that there's an inevitable progress from capitalism to socialism? Because I know more about Marx's life than about his philosophy, of history, which changed. I couldn't keep track of it. Changed and contradicted each other. But Marx thought the revolution was going to happen in 1848. Then it was moved up. 47. Then it was moved up to 48, 49. It kept moving up in his lifetime. I don't blame him for believing that, wanting to believe that, because I want to believe the same thing. But this idea of progress and that capitalism must lead to, or will lead to socialism. I mean, might it not as well lead to a kind of 1984 Orwellian kind of horror society, which we see symptoms of right now in the sort of discarding of unnecessary people all over the world?
My answer to your two questions, Tuli, is yes and yes. Your first question about whether there have been, let's call them social experiments, at different times and places, often very small, which give us some idea of what socialism could be. Yeah, sure. And that's how socialism as an idea arose, and it arose before Marx, and Marx contributes to this idea in a rather special way. But these were all small experiments, and now we have to think about a world with over 5 billion people on it, and whether it's possible for the entire world to be organized in a way which makes not only possible for people to have decent lives, but which doesn't destroy the conditions for human life on the planet. That this is now the problem before us. Now, as to whether it is inevitable that socialism will come, I don't think so, and Marx didn't think so. Marx talked about a possibility of something he called barbarism as an alternative. He was, as you rightly pointed out, rather optimistic about socialism coming and coming relatively soon. I don't share that optimism. I think what more likely in terms of the developments that you mentioned and the others that you could have, that barbarism of one kind or another, such as we see now developing in Yugoslavia and some other places in the world, that to me is a very real possibility. But if socialism is only a small possibility, given the alternatives, which are not only barbarism is the main one, another one is rendering life on this planet impossible through destruction of the ecology. Those are the only two alternatives to some form of socialism. Even if socialism is not as likely as Marx believed, it's something that every rational human being has to struggle for. I don't see as an alternative the continuation of the present society, let's call it democratic capitalism. I think the rug is being pulled out from under it, and it's here where Marx's analysis is particularly valuable, because he describes just what is happening, which is making capitalism, as it's now existing, increasingly impossible.
Well,
it's in other words, there's a difference to me between the inevitability of the collapse of capitalism, which Marx did believe in and which I agree with. There's a difference between that and believing the inevitability of socialism following capitalism, where Marx was too optimistic, but it remains a possibility.
Yeah, I think the barbarism occurs in one or two places where the optimism occurs in a lot of places. And after each business turned down in Europe and each war, he really thought it was, like who was supposed to have said prosperity around the corner, was just around the corner. He denies that, he said that. So I think.
But look, Tuli, there were periods of social revolution that swept the developed countries, and you mentioned 1848. The post-World War I period is another time. Revolutions didn't only occur in Russia, but also in Hungary, where there was a communist government for 3 months. Throughout Germany, many German cities, including Berlin, had governments composed of workers for periods of up to 2 weeks. And there were similar revolts in a number of other places. Even the United States experienced more class struggle in that year, the year 1919, than any time before or since.
Well, when the German Revolution collapsed, I think it sealed the fate of the Russian Revolution, the revolution of the rest of
I think that's true, but what this shows...
Two weeks is not enough.
No, but what this shows, and also the period just after World War II, when there was a lot of... there were the possibilities of social revolution in places like Greece and Italy.
Right.
And 1968 is a period not of social revolution, but a great deal of social turmoil, which gave an
things happen
indication.
all the time, I believe.
No, they don't happen all the time.
No.
They happen sometimes.
Yeah, no, they happen often enough because I believe in the fundamental possibilities of human biology. But then you have to explain. You have to explain why they were crushed so easily. And I think Debs once said that, see, I'm a pacifist to complicate things. He said, if you have the majority of the people really with you, you have to use the word really. And you called it democratic capitalism. I wouldn't flatter him with the word democratic. He said if you had the majority of the people with you, and I would add really with you, then you don't need violence. And if you don't have it, then violence is not enough. And what we had in all those Europeans, the post-World War I revolutions, was a coup, attempt to seize state power. And they didn't succeed. 2 weeks, and even the Paris Commune, which is the most tragic of all, I think, they also didn't succeed. In other words, don't you need an incredible cultural, to use a very broad and non-economic revolution or conversion to have revolutions that really work?
Well, you're looking at revolutions from only one side, from the side of the people who are trying to make it and bring about the change. To understand any revolution and the possibility of it being successful, you have to look at it from the other side as well. What's going on the side of people who hold power? They may be disintegrating. This is what you saw in Eastern Europe. Who would have thought that the kind of social changes which occurred in Eastern Europe from 1989 on would have occurred as relatively non-violently as they did. And it's not because, but wait a second, it's not because of what was being done by the people who were making those revolutions, but what was happening on the other side. So if capitalism collapses and the government in capitalism loses its ability to govern, and that could, various things are being suggested there, then you might have the kind of change happening within capitalism that we've seen in other places.
So you think the changes in Eastern Europe were an advance?
No, I think they were a revolution, though.
Well, a revolution, but we have to define the term revolution. Change for its own sake.
No, it's not a question of change for its own sake.
Government changes in Africa where one monster replaces another.
No, a revolution, I tried to define it by starting with the etymology of the term. And it has to do with the turn of the wheel, the complete turn of the wheel. And what a revolution is a complete change in a society from what was the case politically, economically, and socially to something very different and often opposed.
So then you had a Nazi and a fascist revolution. I like to reserve the term for a movement in the right direction.
I think Hitler's coming to power in Germany represents a fascist revolution for me, and likewise.
All right, so then we have different. To me, revolution always has to be in the left direction. All right, so let's forget about that term. All right, but let's proceed then. How much time do we have to make the revolution? How many?
6 minutes.
Let's postpone this for the next session, and we're moving now to the Cafe Weimar for a little entertainment. And our patron, that founder of Cafe Weimar, he knew that something was going to happen during Weimar, is Jerry Garcia. No, it's Karl Marx. I think who Jerry Garcia wanted him to say, this is an anonymous drawing that I blew up.
Who did
Is that the right word? Okay. Now, tell us what you're going to read and
Okay.
go to it. A little action here. The stage is yours.
Tuli has asked me to read a poem, and so I've chosen one of my favorite poems, which was written by Bertolt Brecht. The poem is called A Worker Reads History. Who built the 7 gates of Thebes? The books are filled with names of kings. Was it kings who hauled the craggy blocks of stone? And Babylon, so many times destroyed, who built the city up each time? In which of Lima's houses, that city glittering with gold, lived those who built it? In the evening when the Chinese wall was finished, where did the masons go? Imperial Rome is full of arcs of triumph. Who reared them up? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? Byzantium lives in song. Were all her dwellings palaces? And even in Atlantis of the legend, the night the sea rushed in, the drowning men still bellowed for their slaves. Young Alexander conquered India. He alone? Caesar beat the Gauls. Was there not even a cook in his army? Philip of Spain wept as his fleet was sunk and destroyed. Were there no other tears? Frederick the Great triumphed in the 7 Years' War. Who triumphed with him? Each page a victory. At whose expense the victory ball? Every 10 years a great man. Who paid the piper? So many particulars, so many questions.
Well,
Right?
how much time do we have? We'll be back. We have 4 minutes?
Actually, 3.
3 minutes. Is there anything you want to say to sum up what we've discussed now? Because next week we're going to discuss how to make the revolution.
Well,
not next week, but down the line.
I think you move too far too fast. You got to understand what the society we're living in is like, how it works.
All right, 3 minutes, tell us.
No, I can't. But I'm saying you've got to understand that, how it works, where it's come from, how it's developed, as well, of course, as who benefits most from the society and who benefits least, and then where the society seems to be tending, given how it works. These are the kinds of things that Marx, 99% of Marx's writings are devoted to, and it's coming out of that kind of analysis that you can begin even to raise questions of what kind of change is possible and how people contribute to it. And instead, you, like too many Americans, Tuli, rush to the bottom line. It is the bottom line. We want to know whether a radical social change is possible and what can follow it. But we can't get to the bottom line before going through these steps. Otherwise, we just exchange biases.
All right, but
I mean,
then
it's just not.
You may ask.